February 4th, 2007 was a Super Bowl Sunday. Across the country, it was the kind of night that looks the same in every window. Televisions glowing, wings on the table, a low roar rolling out of half the living rooms on the block. In Abilene, Texas, a young mother named Charity Lee was working the busiest shift of the year, waiting tables at a Buffalo Wild Wings across town. She had 2 children at home, a 4-year-old daughter named Ella and a 13-year-old son named Paris. She had hired a babysitter for the night. Her kids were covered. The babysitter wouldn't let anything bad happen, right? By the end of the night, one of her children would be dead, and the other would be the reason. To almost everyone who met him, Paris Bennett was not a warning sign. He was the opposite. He was gifted, genuinely, unusually gifted. A genius-level IQ, later measured at 141. Articulate, charming. The kind of kid the teachers remember for the right reasons. From the outside, Charity Lee had a brilliant son and a beautiful little girl. But something in Paris had been wrong for a long time, in a way that no test could measure. He would later admit that he had had thoughts of killing since he was a small child. Not the ordinary anger every kid feels. Something colder and constant, running quietly underneath the surface the whole time. The signs were there. They weren't subtle. As a young boy, Paris would bang his head against the wall until it bled. There was a home video of him making threatening gestures toward his baby sister. And when he was 11 years old, he threatened the whole family with a kitchen knife. That last one frightened Charity enough to act. She checked her son into Red River Hospital, a psychiatric facility, hoping that someone with the training she didn't have could tell her what was wrong. About a week later, they discharged him. They told her he was fine. What they did not tell her, and what she would only find out much later, was that somewhere in his file was a note that the boy was obsessed with shooting and killing. She gave her son over to the people who were supposed to see what she couldn't, and they sent him home. Charity's own life wasn't easy. It started with conflict early on. This wasn't the first murder to move through her family. When Charity was 6 years old, her father was killed outside of the family's Atlanta home. Her mother was charged with hiring a man to do it, and was later acquitted. She had grown up in the shadow of all that, and of course, it took its toll. She battled depression and heroin addiction for years, and by early 2007, she had relapsed. She was going through a private struggle that she was trying to climb out of. For most families, a parent's relapse is just something to survive. In Paris's mind, by his own account, it became something else. A reason, maybe an excuse for something that he had already been waiting to do. Because Paris didn't want to hurt his mother in the ordinary way. He wanted to destroy her. And he had decided, with a cold arithmetic that runs through this entire case, that the way to inflict the most pain on Charity Lee was not to hurt her at all. It was to take away the thing that she loved most. That was Ella. Around 10 o'clock, Paris went to work on the only obstacle in the house, the babysitter. He was 13, brilliant, persuasive. She had no reason to expect that she was being manipulated by a child. He talked her into leaving, convinced her everything was fine, that she could go. And she did. That left Paris alone in the house with his 4-year-old sister. Sometime before 11:30, he walked into Ella's room, and with a knife and a bout of cold calculation, he went to work on his little sister. 17 times. Then he did something that told investigators almost immediately that this was not a child who had simply snapped, Before he called anyone for help, he called a school friend, and he talked for about 6 minutes. 6 minutes. Only after that did he dial 911 at 11:42 that night. On the call, he decided to put on a show. He told the dispatcher a story about a demon, about Ella not really being Ella, a boy acting out the kind of insanity that he thought might explain what he had done. When the dispatcher told him to start CPR, he didn't. He faked it. He counted out loud, pacing the room, going through the motions of saving a life that he had already taken, so that the recording would sound the way it was supposed to. He was 13 years old, and he was already managing the scene. When the whole thing was finally laid out, the motive was the coldest part of it all. Paris Bennett didn't kill Ella because he hated Ella. By his own account, he killed her because of what she meant to their mother. He wanted Charity to suffer for the rest of her life, and he decided the surest way to do that was to take her daughter. Ella was not the target. She was only the weapon. Years later, sitting across from journalist Piers Morgan in a Texas prison, Paris described it in his own words. He said that he had carried a flaming ball of wrath in his stomach, aimed squarely at his mother. Morgan has interviewed a lot of killers. He called this the most chilling conversation he had ever had, because the young man across the table seemed genuinely empty, a person missing the wiring that the rest of us take for granted. Then, Texas law drew a strange, narrow line straight through the case. The minimum age to be tried as an adult in Texas is 14. Paris was 13, by a matter of months. So the boy who had planned and carried out the murder of his sister could not be tried as an adult. He pleaded guilty in juvenile court to capital murder and received the maximum the law allowed. 40 years with the possibility of parole after 20. During the proceedings, he was evaluated and diagnosed as a psychopath. Not troubled, not a good kid broken by one terrible night. A psychopath. The real clinical thing sitting inside a genius-level 13-year-old who had just shown everyone exactly what that word meant. And then there was Charity Lee, a mother who in the span of a single night lost both of her children. One was gone forever. Almost anyone would have walked away. Charity didn't. Not at first. For years she stayed in contact with the son who had murdered her daughter, trying to hold on to some thread of the child she believed she had raised. Paris himself was astounded she kept answering the phone. He couldn't understand why she still called. She said publicly that she could not simply flip off the switch of loving him, that he is still her son, even as she came to understand what he actually was. My son is a psychopath, she said. I can't help him. And still, for a long time, she couldn't bring herself to give up on him completely. She tried to build something out of the wreckage. She started a victims organization in Ella's name. She had another son years later, and she worked hard to make a successful life, even though Paris had done everything in his power to make that impossible. Over time, the distance finally grew into something that she couldn't close. In 2021, she cut off contact for good after learning that Paris had gotten involved with a woman who was facing charges for planning a mass shooting. A woman who was out on bond only a couple hours from where Charity was raising her younger child. That was the line. I finally accepted, she said, that it's okay to love my son, but really dislike the man he has become. Paris Bennett is in a Texas prison. He's not the 13-year-old child on that 911 call anymore. He's a grown man. And in February of 2027, for the first time, he becomes eligible for parole. And if it's never granted, He walks out in 2047. He'll be 53 years old. He set out at 13 to make sure his mother would spend the rest of her life in pain. For that, he got 40 years and a parole date. She got a sentence without one. Charity Lee lost one child to the grave and the other to madness. And in the end, the only child that can ever come home is the one she prays never will.